Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Joey Knight Jr. here once again with another comic book review today. But today's comic book, a little bit different. It does come from the Rippaverse. It is Saints and Sinners. There it is, cover D right there. Has all of the characters that we'll be visiting during this review. So, the Saints and Sinners, it is 6 short stories done by various people. In this series, it is done by Will Jordan, which is the Critical Drinker, Heel vs. Babyface as Calum Edmonds, which is Mauler, Jay David, Drunk 3PO, Eric July, the founder of the Rippaverse, and then Sylvia and Jen Saska, who are the writers of Bloodroof and Yaira. So, like I said, 6 short stories. This will get into spoilery territory because I want to talk about it, but I'm kind of going to gloss over everything quickly and then give my thoughts on each individual story just to kind of make this process go a little quicker. So with that being said, our first story in Saints and Sinners is Chasing Ghost, which was written by Az from Heel vs. Babyface. This story follows Ingrid of the Alpha Corps, which I am very interested in because, if I remember correctly, everyone else chose to make their own original character. Az chose to use a current Rippaverse character and build a story upon her. So our story with Ingrid begins Rippaverse Police Department. Detective Briggs and the Chief of Police are in an argument. Detective Briggs is upset because the Chief asked for accept help in one of the cases. Because it's getting out of hand, bodies are piling up everywhere. So the Chief believes that, hey, we need accept help. So when Ingrid and Detective Briggs end up meeting each other, it's instantly heated off the bat. Briggs brings up the last time Ingrid was with a police officer, that being Guy Wilkins, and he unfortunately died while patrolling with Ingrid in Alpha Corps number 1. So, not off to a great start with this potential relationship. They investigate the crime scene on the inside of the building where 2 of the bodies are at, and it is discovered that they are, boom, just instantly killed at the same time, at least from what they're gathering inside the building. Their bodies seem to be frozen, as I'll pull up some of the fantastic art, by the way, in this book, as always. Let me turn back to that page. At least that's what I gathered it looked like. It looked like just from the coloring and everything else. But as you can see right there, yeah, just at least it was quick. Some positives right there, which is what I could not say for the third body they found. Although it may have been quick, it was definitely a lot more painful. They go outside, look at the third body. That one seemed to be a lot more personal. That one seemed to be, just a lot more brutal because there's blood everywhere. He was left in a very humiliating position. But while they're investigating, they see a figure in the distance. Ingrid goes to investigate, and who's that figure? None other than Sydney Bloodroof. Once again, written by the Saska sisters, as I mentioned earlier. And that was a very welcome surprise in this book. I did not think of all the characters that may have been from the Rippaverse we'd be getting a visit from in this story. I did not expect Sydney Bloodroof. I expected maybe the other Alpha Corps members, because after all, Ingrid's part of their group. But nope, it was Bloodroof. And Bloodroof's just letting her know, like, hey, you got a lot of things on your plate right now. You got a lot of other enemies. Try not to make one out of me. I'm just letting you know you're dealing with magic here, something that's way above your head. So you might want to need some help. So as a token of good faith, Sydney helps her out, locates where these assailants are at. It turns out that they're at the docks, so Ingrid makes her way over there. We then see 2 militant type people. At least that's what I gathered from their uniform, the fact that they had weapons on them, which, interesting note, at least I thought this was interesting, their logos all around their uniform and everything was a yin-yang symbol, but instead of just the black and white, it was black, white, and red, so 3 colors. So, the 2 people, they're looking for their other partner. And they find their partner. He's all tied up to it in a chair. Turns out his name's Lucas. Lucas does not look to be in good shape, but as they find Lucas, Ingrid shows up. It all breaks down from there. But turns out the other man in the group was just trying to stall Ingrid. Lucas awakens, and it's looking like Lucas is trying to steal Ingrid's soul out of her body. Almost does, until he's called off by the female in the group, like saying, hey, Lucas, bind together with me. He does, they escape, and that's the end of the story. Detective Briggs and Flores Park PD, they catch up with Ingrid, and it's like, what's going on here? And Ingrid just says the line, just catching ghosts. And then our story ends. Ingrid's visiting a graveyard. She's talking to a tombstone. And when she leaves, we see that it's Guy Wilkins' tombstone. So obviously, Ingrid is still carrying that death with her, very much close to her. It is still affecting her from Alpha Core number 1. And then our final shot in the comic, we see a hand touching the tombstone, smoke's coming out from the tombstone, and the final shot we get is a skeleton type creature watching Ingrid leave the graveyard. And that is the end of Catching Ghost. I really enjoyed this short story. I liked how it was using a current Rippaverse character and kind of expanding on, you know, what they have going on. They're not just in a team. These people can go out and do other things, which if you're gonna do it with someone that already exists within the Rippaverse, I feel like a member of the Alpha Core is the best person to do it with. So I'm glad Ash chose to do a member of the Alpha Core, and I'm glad he chose to do Ingrid instead of, say, Brian Solari, who is already kind of getting his own spotlight through the Great War of Separation series at the Rippaverse. So I'm glad to be seeing Ingrid kind of getting that same spotlight here in Saints and Sinners. Incredible story told. Gave us just enough to make me want, whether it's through more short story formats in Saints and Sinners, or maybe things get expanded upon and we get our own little 70 to 90 page comic of Ingrid chasing ghosts. I don't know exactly how they plan on doing this with Saints and Sinners. I don't know if all the stories are just going to stay in these books in the same 15 or so page format, or if this is kind of testing the waters and seeing, okay, they really like this story, they really like that story, and let's push these stories into their own comic series. Don't know exactly how that's working out, but either way, I'm hoping and I can't wait to potentially get more of this Ingrid side quest in Catching Ghost. But with that being said, we're going to read, well, I'm going to read our next story, which is done by Drunk 3PO J. David, Across the Bear. So I will see y'all again here shortly to read Across the Bear. All right, so our next story, J. David Drunk 3PO, it is Across the Bear. So this one, you know, a little different from the other one. Like I said, everyone else kind of chose to create their own character to put in the Rippaverse, outside of Az, who grabbed Ingrid from Alpha Core. And our character, also something I want to mention real quick. Yeah, I'm assuming it's going to be this way for the rest of them, but we get little, you know, inserts before the story starts from the authors of the short story, basically just expressing their gratitude for the opportunity, expressing the gratitude of the Rippaverse for, you know, kind of building Eric July's company to where it's at right now, and just hoping that everyone enjoys Saints and Sinners. You know, giving a little backstory to themselves, how they end up finding themselves in this spot where they're creating this short story. Now for J. David, Drunk 3PO's story, Cameron Cross, Across the Bear, we start our story off with our main character. He's waking up in the middle of the road. He doesn't know who he is, doesn't know where he's at, but he sees electricity coming from his body. So as he's walking around trying to figure everything out, he hears a lady scream from an alleyway. He sees that she's getting robbed by these two thugs, and you know, it's taking him back to a flashback. And the flashback takes us to when he's in the military. He's taking orders like, hey, we're about to invade this town, leave no survivors, destroy everything. And it got dark. It got dark real quick. So that's all I'll say about that. You want to know how dark it got? Pick up the book and read how dark Cross's flashback got. So we then get brought back to present day, and the thugs kind of turn their attention on him now. They're, you know, demanding like, hey, that cross you're wearing, we want it. And he kind of looks at him like, Why don't y'all just call me? And just starts beating them up. Very easily, mind you. Very easily beats these two thugs up. We get the wee-woo. Cops show up, and the two of them, the first one, he's like, hey, stay where you're at. And Cross didn't like that. He's like, I don't take orders from you. Charges the cop, tackles him, and the other cop pulls out his taser, tasers Cross, but when he tasers him, electricity just starts shooting all around his body, and he passes out. So then he wakes up in the hospital, he's restrained, and when he wakes up, I'm assuming he's like the lead detective for that jurisdiction, and then we have these two mysterious men dressed in black. So when he wakes up, the detective wants to, start questioning him, but he wants to question him alone. The two men in black are like, nah, can't do that. We have to be here for that. So then they leave to discuss that, and they're kind of discussing, like, why can't I do that? Y'all haven't really told me anything about yourselves anyway. I don't know where y'all are coming from. This is my jurisdiction. I want to question him alone. And there's like, you don't have the access to that type of intel. He needs to be interviewed with us in the room. While they're arguing about that, Cameron Cross gets freed from the restraints, and he breaks through the window and leaves the hospital. When they walk back in, they see he's gone. So that's when we get the information that, and I'll pull up the exact experiment right here, that our guy Cameron Cross is an experiment from the cybernetic Alpha Platoon, and he's gone rogue. And the lead detective's like, so wait, all this mystery for just some military guy who's going AWOL, left his post? And then that's when we hear the bombshell. That Cameron Cross is a cyborg. We got cyborgs now running around in the Rippaverse, on top of Xeps and, all the dark arts and all these other superheroes and evil beings. Now we got cyborgs to deal with. Thank you, Drunk 3PO. So we then see, after Cross made his escape, he finds himself into a church, and he grabs some clothes from a donation box, and he just finds himself starting to pray. Like, hey, please, can you help me figure out who I am, where I'm at, what I'm doing? I don't know. And the final shot we get, while he's praying at the cross, we see a figure behind him watching him pray. And that's how the short story ends. So, at least comparatively for me, not as much information, not as much stuff going on in this short story as his book, but I don't think this one needed it as much, to be fair. I felt like I just got enough to where I'm hooked. Like I'm hooked on Cross. I want to know about the military background. I want to know more about, was he born human and then they turned him to a cyborg? Was he always a cyborg? Like, I want to know more about this stuff. I want to know more about that information. And I want to know more as to why it seems he's why the cyborg tends to go towards faith. At least that's what I get from how the short story went. It seems like if there was ever any other points in his life where, he felt like he needed answers, he's going towards faith. Like, I want to know more about that perspective. He's wearing the cross necklace. I want to know more about that stuff. So, once again, just kind of like how Az did with his book, gave you enough to hook you, but left you with many, many questions to be answered that I hope do get answered at some point. So, very much enjoyed Drunk 3PO's story in Saints and Sinners, Across the Bear. And then when I come back for the next section of this review, it is going to be Eric July, The Weight of Restraint. All right, we're back for Saints and Sinners. Now we have the Eric July story of The Weight of Restraint. Now our story begins, we're in the middle of a prison fight, and our main character for this portion of the story, he's dodging. He's being attacked by this crazy guy with a knife, and he's dodging every single attack. But there's one point because, he's trying to make sure he doesn't actually fight the guy. But there is one point where he ducks, and he has an opportunity to just waylay a guy in the midsection. He acts like he's gonna go for it, but he stops himself. He stops himself before he can punch the guy, and then eventually, a couple of guards, they tackle them both, restrain them, fight's over. And then, the next page, we get taken to what seems to be what I got from it, an orientation for people working within like the justice system, basically people just looking through cases of, I'm guessing things like retrials, or, you know, if a court wants to, you know, get like second opinions on like, hey, do you think this person should, you know, get out on parole or things like that. Basically just, you know, that type of thing is what I gathered from it. And basically the guy laying the orientation's like, hey, don't look too deep into any of this. They just want our names attached to it, so that way everything can at least said it was reviewed. So just, you know, open it, boom, 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 do your little magic, and just send it back their way. Don't actually investigate anything. Just, you know, just click, 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 go on about your day. But then he, as the class is leaving, he looks at one person in particular, and he's, you know, like, we're glad to have your services and everything. And we come to find out this character is Jackson Canehart. And what I gathered from the little, you know, mental bubbles and everything for Jackson, you know, going into his office and everything, it seems like, because he said that they were happy because, you know, have like an inside perspective or whatever, and they were happy to hire him because of that. So I'm assuming maybe he went through, you know, the jail system, the prison system, and then got this job. That's what I'm thinking is going on with this character. And, you know, he's starting out his day, you know, just going through some files, and then he sees this one marking. I'll get to it, because what exactly it said I forgot. It was J something. Yeah, JF-17. And then, apologies folks, override per directive. That's just mysteriously on one of his little files. So he's looking it up or whatever, can't really dig much into it. So he eventually goes to public library, gets a little further, but can't really get that much into it. And, you know, security guard at the library, he kind of, you know, stops him or whatever, like, hey, you know, you're not one of the regulars, what are you doing here? He's like, no, just some homework, I'm good, or whatever, leaves the library. And then, by the time he gets home, all the files of everything he had looked up already pulled from the internet, already wiped. But, thankfully, he backed everything up, and he starts looking more into things, and basically everything about this case file is just redacted, very limited information, but there is a name, and the name to the file is Samford Willard, and that is where our story ends. Pretty short, sweet, and simple to the point. By far, this has, I don't want to say by far, but this definitely has, so far of the 3 I've read of the 6 issues, it definitely has the least amount of information dropped for our character, for, well, in this case, I guess 2 lead characters, because, you know, we have the guy on the outside investigating everything, and then we have this mysterious Samford character on the inside of the prison. And it's kind of like, we really don't know much about either. Some things are inferred when it comes to, you know, Jackson's case, but we still don't really know about either character. But I am at least intrigued to learn more about what's going on with these 2 characters, especially with this particular story. You know, it was already kind of hard enough, at least in my opinion, be hard enough to write a story 15 pages for one character, you know, grab that hook. But Eric dropped 2 characters on us that kind of like seemed like they'd be a co-lead of this story, and did it in the 15-page confinement. So I'm kind of impressed with that, because, you know, it did hook me enough to where I'm like, you know, like I've said before, whether it's a continuation with more Saints and Sinners books or they get their own story. Don't know how they're doing this. But I will say I was definitely intrigued. Really, outside like that beginning scene in the prison, no action, just straight storytelling, just laying enough to, like I said, grab that hook and make you hopefully want to read more, which I'm definitely interested in reading more if we get that opportunity. But now I'm going to go read our next story, and that is Bone God by Caleb Edmonds, aka Mahler. All right, we are back with the story of Saints and Sinners. This time our story is Bone God by Mahler, and let's get into it. So our story begins, we have some travelers, and what I gathered on, at least this is what I gathered, this is how I took it later on in the story. It's a family group of travelers, but they also brought along from a couple of acquaintances. The first acquaintance being Mr. Graves. He's the type of guy, he's the one with the authority. If something goes down and they need some muscle, Mr. Graves is going to be the one to, either blast their way out, fight their way out, or just do whatever is necessary to get them out safely. And then another character by the name of Maps, who is a navigator, he's a historian, so he's there for his brains, little yin and yang situation. You got the brain, you got the muscle, then you have the family, whose sole purpose to coming to this, I'm going to call it a temple, is to gain immortality. That is their sole purpose of guiding themselves through this temple, trying to figure out that secret. Get immortality. They enter the temple, they start making their way, they eventually find this wall that they can't get past or whatever. Mr. Graves, trying to be smart about it, it's like, well, hey, there's this puzzle, let me figure out the puzzle, maybe it'll give us some access if I complete the puzzle. Everyone else just like, nah, we're just going to use C4. So they use C4, explode up the wall, and then when that happens, Mr. Graves sees something. He sees like this ghostly, spiritual, ghoulish type creature. So, he's like, hey, I saw some, I think we need to be careful. Maybe, he's not sure about it anymore. But everyone's like, no, this place is playing tricks on you. You're just seeing things. They go forward a little bit more, and he sees it again. So he pulls out that thing, and he starts aiming. He's waiting to see something so he can start going to shooting. But one of the sons, he gets in the way. He stands in front of him. He's like, what are you doing? You're crazy. You're just seeing things. There's nothing here, blah, blah, blah. And all of a sudden, the creature starts popping up behind him. So Mr. Graves takes his shot. The son gets out of the way, and Mr. Graves thinks he's hit him, but there's no blood, there's no skin or body parts or anything to suggest that anything was there. And everyone's just like, you've gone mad, like, maybe you're not as smart as we thought you are, you're acting like an idiot, blah, blah, all this, that, third. And they progress a little further. They finally find themselves at the sanctuary, and once again, Mr. Graves, he's getting a bad feeling about all this. He's like, and finally he tries one last time to tell the father, you need to get out here. We don't, need to be here. But the father's like, you know what? You've embarrassed yourself enough. I've had enough of you. You're dismissed. So when he dismisses Mr. Graves, he grabs Maps and he's like, hey, I'm leaving, but I'm not leaving without someone who knows their way around here, knows how to get out here, and knows about these types of things. So you're coming with me. Maps better thank him for that. He better dedicate his life to trying to, appease Mr. Graves because of what happens next. Because what happens next is the father, he's instructing everyone, grab your pickaxes, get at it or whatever. Let's find this immortality. And he starts translating the things on the wall. And he quickly realizes, I should have listened to Mr. Graves. Because what ends up happening is, he says Bone God, and I don't know if it's because he said Bone God or that's just when the Bone God decided to appear. But when he says Bone God, lights go out, no one can see anything, and then all of a sudden it gets graphic. It gets gnarly. Everyone's skin starts to pull off their body, and then little by little, bones are coming out. The daughter, she self-deletes before the process can finish, takes herself out of the equation. It yeah, it gets crazy. But the father is just left. Everyone's gone except the father. And then the creature, he starts putting his hand closer to him, touches his forehead, one eye stays normal, and then I gotta show, instead of describing it, the other eye becomes like that, like all reptile-y, as the way I've described it, which, by the way, beautiful art. Of the 4 stories I've read so far, I think Bone God has like my favorite art style that I've seen so far. But yeah, and that's how the story ends. And Mahler did say in his little, intro to the short story that he wanted to create something isolated that, it doesn't disrupt anything within the Rippaverse, which I appreciate, but also make it to where if the people spoke and the people said, hey, we really like this story and we want it to be like an actual part of the Rippaverse and get expanded on more, then it can do that, which I think it does a perfect job, because it shows us like how deadly this Bone God thing can be. We still have Mr. Graves and Maps who have seen this place but survived it because they got out in time. And then what happened to the father? Is he no longer with us? Did he get immortality but at the price, and the price was his family? I don't know, but I want to know. So hopefully somewhere down the line we get more Bone God, because that story was incredible. But enough about Bone God, because our next story is going to be The Underdog by the Saska Sisters, and I'm particularly excited for this because it is wrestling themed. Let's go. All right, we are back with story number 5 of Saints and Sinners, and this story is The Underdog by the Saska Sisters. Finally, a wrestling themed story within the Rippaverse. We've gotten teases of it here and there throughout Flores Park, but we finally have an official story highlighting professional wrestling in the Rippaverse. Because, in case you can't tell behind me with all the decor, I'm a wrestling nerd, okay? I love wrestling. For goodness sakes, if any of you have been on this channel before, I'm a wrestler. So, full bias intended that I want a wrestling story full-time within the Rippaverse, and Saints and Sinners is my way of getting that. Then let's keep inserting these types of stories in Saints and Sinners. All for it. But let's get to the story. So our story begins, SSWL, big promotion, and their world champion, he's just injuring people left and right. And it's leaving the promoter Gayo. It's spelled G-A-O, so that's how I'm pronouncing it, Gayo. He's left with no one to face his champion for their big event. He's berating his champion, like, you keep injuring people, blah, blah, blah. And, Big Tuna, he's just acting like, so? Ain't my fault. I'm the veteran here. I'm the big star. I'm the big draw. Ain't my fault they get hurt. You know. I'm pretty sure we all know the type. So, his assistant calms them down. They leave. They're talking backstage and everything. Well, we gotta find someone, This is our big event after all, but who's gonna be dumb enough to face them? And then all of a sudden, a fellow wrestler by the name of Robin, she pulls up, and then she gets dragged into the conversation. They ask her, can you find someone in the indies? And they eventually convince her, hey, there's $10K in it for you. If you find someone, another $10K if they're good. So she begins her search, and that search leads us to Shungite by the name of Larry Shungite. And at first when I was reading it, I read it as Shugnite, but the spelling is Shungite. So Shungite is how I'm pronouncing it. Apologies for any mispronunciations in anything from the short stories on this video. But anyway, continuing. So Larry, he's with his nieces and nephews. He's feeding them sandwiches and everything. And then his dad comes by. He's like, hey, time for your match, blah, blah. Goes out to the ring and he immediately gets attacked by his opponent. And, Larry's talking to him like, hey, I thought I was the heel. What's going on? And his opponents let him know, like, you are still the heel. All cocky and smiley and everything. And Larry's just kind of like, oh, okay. This must be a new thing. I didn't know babyface attack people from behind. and then proceeds to whoop him, beat him 1, 2, 3. When he looks out the crowd, we see a familiar face. That familiar face is Robin. So after the show, they're all talking on the side, and we figure out that Robin knows the dad. Knows good old Anthony Diamond Shungite. Because Anthony trained Robin when she was coming up. So that's how they know each other. And then she offers Larry a chance to fight at SSWL, their big event that's coming up, and he gladly accepts it. So later on, he goes down to the training facility. They see Big Tuna there. He almost injures a trainee. And, you know, Big Tuna, he's just, you know, all about himself. He's just like, you know, whatever. If someone gets hurt, someone gets hurt. I don't care. You know, that kind of attitude. And he's brushing off Larry, like, you know, so, you know, who's he? I'm the big star. I'm the only person you got to worry about having around here. And, you know, Larry and him get into a war of words. And the promoter, he's eating it up because he's seeing money signs. He's like, oh, yeah, this is going to be good. So Larry eventually gets a training match. And, you know, he's in the ring with another one of these guys who's like, oh, you ain't earned anything yet. I've been here for a long time, blah, blah. And Larry proceeds to whoop him. So, after that, we find Larry. You know, he's looking up the stars. A falling star comes by. We hear someone in the background say, make a wish. And it turns out to be Robin. They have a little exchange outside. You know, there's some there. Maybe. Somewhere down the line, if we get another issue, please, fingers crossed. Anyway, so after we get that little interaction, Big Tuna and Larry, they're supposed to have, you know, a rehearsal, go over their big match. And Larry walks in, he's like, you gonna train on a full stomach? You know, rehearsals are about to start. I thought they started at noon today. And Big Tuna's like, oh, I don't need a rehearsal. I've been champion for 2 years. I've been doing this for 2 decades. You know, I'm a big deal. I don't need to do anything. You're just a scrub. You know, you're no one. All right? If you need to rehearse, you need to rehearse, but I don't. So Larry lets him know, like, I ain't a nobody. You're going to remember my name. Everyone here is going to remember my name. So we finally get to the big show day, and champion Big Tuna, he's making his way down the ring, this big grand entrance, the women beside him, everything else. He's all smiles, all happy and everything. But Larry, he's talking to Pro, like, hey, what's this underdog name? What's this underdog business? That's not who I am. And Promoter's like, listen, you're just here for one night. Go out there, no regrets, put on a good showing, but remember to eat the pin, take the fall. So Suge Knight goes out there, and, you know, he's introduced as the underdog. He gets in the ring, and Big Tuna's just like, how about we just make this an easy night for the both of us? Hits him with his finisher, and he's expecting Larry to stay down. But Larry kicks out. He kicks out 2 on the finisher right off the bat. And, you know, Big Tuna's like, oh, you know, you still think that this is going to be a real match? Which Larry makes it a real match. Larry's fighting back. He starts putting a whooping on Big Tuna, and he gets the 1, 2, 3. New SSWL champion. And the crowd goes crazy. Gayo's going crazy in the back. He's like, how could you do this? You know, you're not under contract, blah, blah, blah. But then his assistant calms him down some more, or at least tries to. And he's like, oh, hold on. This is the biggest ratings we've ever done. We need him. And then that forces Gayo begrudgingly to ask Robin, listen, is there any way you can convince him to sign a contract? We need him. And Robin goes like, you know, it's going to cost you some. You know, it's going to cost you a pretty penny. And he's just like, I don't care. Sign him. And that's where our story ends. So unlike the other stories, this story, you know, gives us a beginning, you know, gives us a little backstory on the character, and it gives us like a solid ending of like, if this does end up being a one-shot, you know, we really don't need anything after this. I want something after this. And they leave enough pieces there for there to be something after this. But if we don't ever get another underdog story through the Rippaverse, it's fine ending like that. So very different from all the other stories we've seen so far. Now there's one story left, so I don't know if Critical Drinker's story ends this way, but the Sasuke sister story ends in that way of, it gives you a satisfying ending of, if there's no more story for this, then it didn't end on a cliffhanger. There doesn't have to be a continuation of the story. But I want there to be a continuation of the story. I need a continuation of the story. I need more wrestling in my Rippaverse comics. So please, Eric July, Sasuke Sisters, Rippaverse crew, Rippaverse Vandal, please ask for it, because I need it injected into those veins. But that leaves us with one story, and that last story is One Little Push by Will Jordan, aka The Critical Drinker. All right, our final short story, One Little Push by Will Jordan, aka The Critical Drinker. And does it deal with an interesting subject for potentially to be addressed later in the Rippaverse? So our story begins with this Reaper-like creature is the vibe I get off them. Me personally, I think it's, I'm gonna pronounce it terribly again, Damonku. I think it's him, but who knows? It could be a different character, but that's who I think it is. But anyway, this character, he's talking about, you know, he's very good at his job. He's been at it for a very long time. He's seen a lot of terrible things, and he's just gotten used to seeing those terrible things. He doesn't take joy in his work, but he's gotten very good at it. And he doesn't try to interfere in the balances of the universe and everything, but sometimes he has to make exceptions. And then right after that, we go into another scene where Fontano, yes, we just love Fontano around here. Such a great guy, if you've read the Isom comics. And he's hiring a hitman by the name of Kane, as we soon learn, basically asking him to take out Yaira. Why does Fontano want Yaira taken out? Well, he wants to make sure everyone in the city fears him, because that is how you get respect. That is how you get what you want, is by fear, according to Fontano. So once the hitman says, yeah, I could take this job, Fontano sends his 2 bodyguards on him, and quickly the hitman disposes of said bodyguards. Fontano likes what he sees, and they begin a relationship of where it's, I don't think either one of these guys are ever going to trust each other, but they're going to work for each other. So Fontano, he starts prepping, he starts studying Yaira, he learns that, okay, she can control temperature, turns things into ice, so if I'm going to take out Yaira, then I need a, like, heat-inducing, you know, bullet. I need a bullet with extreme heat, so he gets that. He's getting prepared for his mission, he's getting ready to take out Yaira, he's trying to figure out, you know, who is Yaira, you know, connects it with Avery, you know, his fights with him, makes the Avery connection, so it makes the Altonia connection, and then he finds out that Sally Rodell is Yaira. They are the same person. So now he starts studying Sally's routine at Projexis, he starts making a timetable on that, and he begins to plot. And now we take things to Yaira's point of view, where she's just feeling an uncertainty, like anticipation, and it's not sitting well with her. But while she's going to get her daily coffee from across the street, she's stopped by Altonia, and, you know, they catch up, and Altonia decides to join her for coffee. Sorry about the interruption. The dog was barking, so I had to take care of him for a little bit. I'm sure y'all understand. But anyway, where were we at? Oh yeah, so Altonia decides to join Sally for coffee, and as Kane is getting ready to take the shot, that's when this Reaper-like figure decides to interfere, because he sees the timeline that's supposed to happen, and Altonia is the one that's actually going to get taken out by accident instead of Yaira. But he sees a new timeline popping up, a timeline of new possibilities, and he decides to go with that new timeline. And he causes this skater to bump into Yaira and Altonia, and they both fall down, the bullet misses them, and it explodes a car. And Kane is beside himself. He's like, how? That was a perfect shot, blah, blah, blah. He's freaking out. He tries to leave through the elevator. He's like, I may have to hide forever now after this. Because, I just tried to take out Yaira. I failed, Faltoni. Like, I'm done. I gotta hide forever now. And as that elevator door opens up, it is none other than Yaira, and she is not a happy camper. So Yaira takes him out, throws him out of a building. He lands on a car and slowly leaves this mortal coil. And the Reaper character, he's talking, I stayed with him till his last breath. It was the least I could do considering I'm the one that put him in this situation. And just kind of let everyone know he was happy with his decision. While he doesn't condone doing this often, and he knows he probably shouldn't have done that, he's excited about the possibilities that this decision will lead to in the future. And that is the Critical Drinker story. For Saints and Sinners, and overall, I enjoyed all 6 short stories. Each one offered something different that I think belongs in the universe of the Rippaverse. I feel like all 6 stories could be expanded on and they would have a rightful place into this world that Eric July has created. And I am looking forward to see what comes of Saints and Sinners, whether we continue getting these 6 stories in short story format with Saints and Sinners, or do we go beyond here and each individual story gets its own run by itself, and then Saints and Sinners continues as maybe like this anthology series that highlights different writers and different things throughout the universe. I don't know where they take this, but I enjoyed the ride for the first issue, and I'm definitely looking forward to more when it comes to what we're gonna get out of this series. Like I said, whether it's a continuation in this format, these 6 stories strictly stay within the Saints and Sinners line, or if Saints and Sinners changes each time and we see different stories in Saints and Sinners every single issue, and Saints and Sinners is used kind of like a Ripazine format of whatever ones are popular, they get expanded on their own issues. How that goes, I don't know, but I'm looking forward to see it. So, hope everyone enjoyed my review for Saints and Sinners Volume 1, Issue number 1. I know this is a lot longer one than my reviews usually are, but we had 6 stories to talk about. I try to keep it as short as possible. I get long-winded when I talk. It is what it is. But please remember to leave a like, leave a comment, share the video. Let me know what you thought about Saints and Sinners Issue number 1 if you read it. Which story was your favorite? Leave that down in the comments below, and I will see y'all. Oh, wait, hold on. Almost forgot the most important part. Always remember to subscribe to Joey Knight Jr., and then I will see y'all in the next one. Peace.